Right now, an AI can pass the bar exam in the 90th percentile in like seconds, but it cannot conceptualize why a physical box can hold a toy, but a drawn square cannot.
Yeah, it's a completely wild paradox.
Right. I mean, it has immense processing speed. It can access and regurgitate basically every human law ever codified, but it has absolutely zero ontological generativity.
Exactly. We've built these machines that are just unfathomably fast, but structurally speaking, they're completely blind.
And that kind of forces us to look in the mirror, doesn't it? Because we're surrounded by artificial systems that effortlessly outpace us in computation.
Yeah, and that sheer speed is basically just revealing the emptiness of how we've defined intelligence for the last century. We realize that computation alone doesn't actually capture what a mind is doing.
So today, we are tearing down that entire definition. For anyone listening who has ever felt that, standard benchmarks, IQ scores, or those productivity metrics completely fail to capture genuine cognitive depth, we are diving into the math that actually proves you right.
We really are. It's an incredible shift in perspective.
We're unpacking Philip Lilien's massive 2026 UCTE Foundation paper. It's called Closure Intelligence, the ascent from operation to ontological generativity.
It's a dense one, for sure.
Oh, totally. But we have the paper, we have the accompanying architectural diagrams, and we have a very clear mission today. We want to map out an entirely new framework for understanding cognition so you can use it as a shortcut.
Right, because this isn't just about evaluating ourselves, is it?
No, not at all. We are looking at a diagnostic tool that explains the hard limits of AI, the profound failures of our modern educational systems, and literally the trajectory of our entire civilization.
Yeah, to appreciate the scale of Lillian's proposition here, we really need to look at the collateral damage of our current models first.
Let's do it. Where do we start?
Well, he points out that the standard model of intelligence suffers from what he calls deep computational reductionism.
Okay, so treating the brain like a computer.
Exactly. We have spent decades treating the brain like a central processing unit. We measure things like behavioral adaptation, memory retrieval, predictive efficiency.
So basically, if a system outputs a correct answer faster than another system, we just slap a label on it and call it smarter.
That's the trap. We measure the exhaust of the engine and pretend we completely understand the vehicle.
That is such a great way to put it. But that framework totally hits a wall when you look at genuine cognitive breakthroughs, right?
Oh, absolutely. If you measure intelligence merely by processing speed, you cannot explain the qualitative difference between, say, a student solving a complex calculus equation and Isaac Newton inventing calculus in the first place.
Wow. Yeah, because Newton wasn't just calculating faster than his peers.
Right. He wasn't just running the same software on better hardware. Standard models are incredibly shallow with respect to the foundational reality of the thought process.
He stepped totally outside the existing mathematical universe.
Yes. He recognized that the existing tools could not capture continuous change, so he forged an entirely new structural reality. He generated a new ontology.
And a speed-based metric just cannot map that kind of leap. Which brings us to the core mechanism Lilien introduces to replace this speed metric. It's this concept of closure.
This is the big one.
Yeah, and I want to make sure we lock this concept down immediately for everyone listening, because it basically drives the rest of the paper.
It's crucial to understand that in this context, closure isn't psychological. Like, we aren't talking about getting closure after a breakup.
Right. It's structural.
Exactly. Lilien defines it as the condition under which a structure holds itself together. It preserves coherence through transformation without collapsing into incoherence.
Okay, let's unpack this with an analogy because the academic definition is a bit heavy. Is closure basically the difference between building a tower out of a random deck of cards versus building it with interlocking Legos?
That is a perfect way to look at it. Consider the vulnerability of that deck of cards. You can stack them and achieve a localized temporary height. It looks like a structure.
But if you just breathe on it too hard,
boom, it's gone. There is no internal necessity binding those cards together. The moment you introduce a new variable, a gust of wind, a slight vibration, the entire system devolves into chaos. The card tower completely lacks closure.
Right. Compare that to the Legos. The plastic studs in the tubes, they create a binding logic. The pieces don't just rest on one another, they actually integrate.
Yes, and because of that internal logic, the Lego structure maintains its integrity. You can pick it up, turn it sideways, apply pressure to it, and it remains a cohesive unit.
The system achieves what he calls lawful completion.
Exactly. The Lego structure can survive transformation, and Lilien's central thesis is that true intelligence is measured by the depth of structural reality or the density of closure a cognitive system can stably inhabit.
So a mind deepens not by just hoarding more isolated facts, but by migrating into richer, more interlocking architectures of thought.
Right. Architectures that can withstand much greater complexity without shattering.
Okay, if intelligence is basically a migration into deeper structures, we're going to need a map of that territory. And Lilien provides this through what he calls the closure ladder,
Yeah, the latter is fascinating. It's a non-reductive hierarchy.
meaning you don't lose the bottom rungs when you climb up.
Exactly. As a mind moves up, it doesn't discard the previous tools. It reorganizes them under a higher, more demanding regime of coherence.
Okay, let's start at the foundation then. Level 1, operational intelligence.
This is the domain of discrete units and local step-by-step procedures. Operational intelligence relies entirely on explicit rules.
Think of a computer executing lines of code, or just a person doing basic arithmetic.
Right. You are managing separate, distinct inputs according to a strictly prescribed sequence.
I like to call this rung the rule follower. And it's an incredibly powerful level, honestly. Like, if your mind cannot stabilize a discrete unit, if you can't hold the concept of one separate from two, the universe just remains an undifferentiated blur.
You absolutely need level 1 to function. But its vulnerability is its absolute locality.
What do you mean by locality?
The rule follower only knows how to execute the immediate procedure in front of them. It has no vision of the broader architecture that makes the rule valid in the first place.
It's just going step by step.
Exactly, entirely dependent on the algorithm provided. So if the environment shifts even slightly, or if the rule needs to be applied to a completely novel category, the level 1 mind just stalls out.
Because it can't perceive structural relationships, it only perceives sequential steps.
Precisely.
And that structural blindness creates intense cognitive friction when the world stops acting like a simple checklist, which it always does. The realization that things change, that objects move, that data shifts, it forces a crisis in a purely level 1 mind.
A huge crisis. And to resolve that crisis, the mind has to jump to level 2, which is transformational intelligence.
I look at this one as the shapeshifter.
That's a good name for it. The transition to level 2 is a profound cognitive event. The mind suddenly recognizes lawful change.
So we leave behind the static counting of discrete units.
Right, and we begin to understand things like rotation, inversion, relational mapping. The intellect grasps that a form can actually pass into another form without breaking.
Let's ground this in a real-world mechanism so people can visualize it.
Yeah.
Imagine a child holding a wooden block. At level 1, they just count it as a single unit, right?
Right.
When they rotate that block 90 degrees, the visual data entering their eyes completely changes. The lighting is different, the shape looks different. A purely level 1 system might interpret this new visual presentation as a completely different object.
Yes. But a level 2 mind grasps a vital truth. The presentation changed, but the structure survived. It is still the exact same block.
That is the essence of transformational closure. The mind maps the relationship between the initial state and the final state.
Exactly. Number evolves into geometry. Procedure evolves into manipulation. The intelligence is no longer asking what is the next step. It is asking how does this state map onto that state.
Wow, okay. But I can see how constant shape-shifting creates a totally new problem. If everything is just transforming, rotating, and mapping, you are basically stuck in a fluid, chaotic universe.
It becomes exhausting.
Right. A mind swimming in endless transformations eventually needs an anchor. It needs to know what isn't changing amidst all that chaos.
And that profound necessity triggers the ascent to level 3, invariant intelligence.
The truth seeker.
Yes, invariant intelligence involves hunting for the underlying structural necessities that actually survive the chaos of transformation.
So back to our block. At level 2, you observe the rotation of the square block.
But at level 3, you identify that despite the rotation, the internal angles and the total area remain absolutely preserved. You are isolating the invariant properties.
This really feels like the birth of true abstract reasoning. You are moving past surface-level changes and looking for conservation.
You stop asking what can be done or how does it change, and you start demanding what must absolutely remain true.
You capture identity through variation. I mean, without invariant intelligence, we could never have developed physics or algebra, right?
Oh, never. You could never recognize that energy is conserved across a chemical reaction, or that an algebraic equation remains balanced when you apply the same operation to both sides. The level 3 mind finds the bedrock beneath the shifting sands.
which is a massive cognitive leap. Finding a single invariant truth is incredible. But relying on isolated truth creates massive cognitive load.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, if you have 10,000 separate invariants to keep track of, your mind is basically a chaotic warehouse of disconnected facts.
It's unsustainable. To prevent cognitive collapse, the brain has to find a way to organize these isolated truths into families. It has to look for the system itself.
And that brings us to the upper half of the closure ladder. Level 4, symmetry intelligence,
Yeah.
the architect.
Right. And here, Lilien uses the term symmetry in its deepest mathematical sense. We aren't just talking about aesthetic balance, like looking at a pretty snowflake.
Okay, so what does it mean here?
Symmetry intelligence is the perception of structural closure under a defined family of transformations. It is the ability to recognize equivalence classes. The mind perceives how entire architectural worlds of rules hold together as a single, coherent system.
So it is the cognitive difference between knowing a single brick can bear weight and understanding the overarching principles of an entire cathedral.
That's a beautiful way to put it. The level 4 mind sees how the arch supports the dome, how the tension is perfectly distributed across the entire structure.
They don't just see the isolated rules, they see the network of laws operating in concert.
This is where we see the great unifications in scientific history. When physicists developed the standard model of particle physics, or when James Clerk Maxwell unified electricity and magnetism into a single set of electromagnetic equations, they were exercising symmetry intelligence.
They perceived the deep equivalence classes that governed seemingly disparate phenomena. They mapped the cathedral.
Exactly. But the ladder doesn't stop at the cathedral. We push higher into a domain that sounds almost mythical, but is strictly, rigorously mathematical. Level 5. Exceptional closure.
I call this one the integrator. And the paper describes this as operating within rare regimes of unusually dense structural integration. What does that actually look like?
Well, in any given logical universe, there are standard symmetries, the regular predictable systems we just discussed. But mathematically, there are occasionally these rare, highly concentrated points where completely different domains of thought suddenly unify.
Through some unavoidable internal necessity.
Yes, they are anomalies of perfection.
Okay, try to picture finding a hidden chamber in that cathedral we talked about. A room where the acoustics, the ambient light, and the physical tension of the stone all perfectly cancel each other out, creating total silence and absolute structural immobility.
Right, it's an emergent phenomenon that shouldn't logically exist based on just the standard rules, but it does.
And an intelligence operating at level 5 naturally seeks out those exact chambers.
Exactly. Exceptional closure isn't just a larger symmetry, it is a higher order event. A level 5 mind doesn't just navigate existing rules. It discovers incredibly fertile concentrations of truth that act as bridges between completely unrelated fields of reality.
It integrates the unintegratable.
Precisely, which sets the stage for the definitive threshold of this entire framework. Level 6. Ontological generativity.
The creator.
At level 6, a profound shift occurs in the mind. Intelligence ceases to operate within given formal systems.
Wait, really? It just abandons them?
Well, it no longer uses numbers, logic, or symbols as passive, pre-existing tools. Instead, it questions the generative conditions that give rise to those tools in the very first place.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here because this sounds like pure philosophical abstraction.
Fair enough.
If I'm an engineer, right, and I'm designing a suspension bridge, why on earth do I care about questioning the generative conditions of the universe? I just need my math to work so the bridge doesn't fall down into the river. Isn't level 6 basically just academic navel-gazing?
It's a valid question. An engineer building a standard suspension bridge is operating perfectly well at level 4. They are using the established symmetries of classical mechanics.
And that's fine for everyday bridges.
Exactly. But what happens when classical mechanics entirely fails? What happens when you are trying to build a quantum computer or stabilize a fusion reactor and the established rules of the universe just no longer apply?
The cathedral falls apart.
The level 4 mind completely fails there because the cathedral itself is collapsing. A level 6 mind recognizes that the math we use isn't handed down by some deity. It is an emergent property of a deeper closure condition.
So to solve an impossible problem, the level 6 intelligence doesn't look for a slightly better rule.
No, it generates an entirely new framework of reality. It writes a completely new physics engine.
It stops playing the video game and starts coding the core environment of the game.
Exactly that.
Wow. That level of generativity requires a totally different relationship with reality. But how does a mind actually execute that? I mean, it is one thing to sit back and say, I am going to generate a new ontology, but how do you mathematically bridge that gap?
That is the core of Lilien's breakthrough. He argues that to operate at the peak of the ladder, you literally need a completely different kind of number.
And this is where we enter the absolute frontier of the paper. Level 7, NFN-mediated intelligence.
Right. NFN stands for Noetherian Finsler Number. Lilien proposes that true ontological generation requires numbers that are actually capable of mirroring the depth of the reality they are describing.
We need to contrast this immediately with the standard numbers we use every day so people can grasp how weird this is.
Good idea.
If I write the number 5 on a chalkboard, that number is completely inert. It's a passive primitive. It has zero internal life. I have to apply an external rule like an addition sign to force it to interact with another number. The number 5 is essentially a dead brick.
And those dead bricks are perfectly sufficient for level 1 operational tasks. But NFNs are radically different. An NFN is defined in the paper as an internal coherence resonance architecture.
It is a structured entity. The number itself has an anatomy.
Yes. The paper defines this anatomy as a 4-tuple, a mathematical entity with 4 interacting organs, basically.
Okay, 4 interacting organs. Let's translate that heavy notation into the mechanics of what these organs actually do. To me, looking at these variables, an NFN operates remarkably like a living biological cell.
The cellular analogy is highly effective here. The first component is the symmetry coherence eigenvalue.
The skeleton of the cell.
Exactly. This variable dictates the order density of the number state. It provides the stabilization necessary to ensure the number maintains its identity and doesn't just dissolve into incoherence. It is the structural binding force.
Right. But a purely stable skeleton is just a fossil. It doesn't move or interact.
Right.
To have actual generativity, the cell needs muscles. It needs tension.
And that is the second component, the asymmetry resonance eigenvalue.
The muscle.
This organ introduces deviation and gradient into the number. It creates a generative asymmetry, ensuring the state isn't perfectly static. It provides the internal disequilibrium required for becoming.
Okay, so you have the skeleton providing stability and the muscles providing tension. But if the muscles blindly pull against the skeleton, the cell just rips itself apart.
Right. It would be chaotic. There has to be a coordination mechanism. And that brings us to the third component, the phase angle.
Ah, the nervous system of the number.
Exactly. The phase angle acts as the modulation principle. It governs the relative relationship between the symmetry and the asymmetry. It determines whether the internal tension reinforces the structure constructively or grinds against it destructively.
Okay, stability, tension, and coordination. That gives you a functional, living unit.
Yeah.
But the fourth component is what elevates this into pure ontological generativity, the recursive hyperfractal coordinate.
This one is mind-bending. In standard mathematics, the integer 5 is identical whether it describes 5 apples, 5 atmospheric pressure fronts, or 5 entire galaxies. The number is totally divorced from scale or context.
Right, 5 is just 5.
But an NFN possesses this hyperfractal coordinate, which actually maps the number to a specific layer of reality.
The number has an address. It knows exactly where it sits in the universe.
More than just an address, it functions as a nested memory field. Because the NFN is ontologically embedded, it retains the resonance of prior coherent states. The history of the number's interactions literally modifies its coordinate. It carries the weight of its own structural evolution.
That is just staggering. We are moving from stacking dead bricks to orchestrating living cells. A number that actually remembers its own history across physical scales.
It changes everything.
But wait, if numbers are living, internally coordinated entities, the entire nature of arithmetic has to mutate, right? You can't just put a standard plus sign between two living cells.
No, you can't. Basic operations undergo a fundamental phase shift in this math. Addition becomes what Lilien calls closure composition.
So you aren't just adding quantities anymore.
No, you are fusing two coherent states. The stability, tension, phase, and memory of both numbers must dynamically reconcile and settle into a newly integrated entity.
Wow. So what happens with multiplication then? If I multiply two complex NFNs, what am I actually triggering?
Multiplication becomes coherence amplification. It's an intense structural reprojection. You are driving the phase coupling of the two entities.
Okay, so pushing their nervous systems together.
Basically, yeah. If their phase angles align constructively, the overall closure density of the new state explodes exponentially. But if they clash, the interaction might structurally destabilize the output entirely.
And we can measure the success of that interaction using Lilien's coherence norm. Right?
Yes. The coherence norm calculates the interaction between the stability, the tension, and the phase angle. It isn't asking how big is this number. It is asking how fiercely does this state hold itself together.
It measures the ontological vitality of the construct. And honestly, this reveals a terrifying vulnerability in our current technological trajectory.
It really does.
I mean, if the summit of human cognition, the generativity required to rewrite physics and redesign civilizational structures, relies on mechanisms this organic and deeply nested, we are forced to reevaluate our entire reliance on artificial intelligence.
This is definitely the turning point of the deep dive. The massive multi-trillion-dollar AI industry is entirely built upon those dead bricks we talked about earlier.
Yep. Large language models, deep neural networks, their architectures are undeniably complex, sure. But structurally, they're completely locked into level 1 and level 2 of the closure ladder.
They are crunching operational rules and mapping transformational tokens at unimaginable speeds. They possess massive combinatorial scale, but they are ontologically hollow.
An AI can parse billions of parameters to output a statistically perfect legal brief or write functional software code in seconds.
But it is operating entirely within the human-generated formalisms provided to it.
The AI is the ultimate level 1 rule follower and level 2 shapeshifter. It can play the game better than any human ever could, but it is structurally incapable of writing a new game engine.
Exactly. And Lilien formalizes this limitation with what he calls the CI functional, the closure intelligence equation.
Let's break that equation down.
The true depth of any intelligence is a function of 4 variables. The first is closure depth, which is the absolute highest rung on the ladder the system can reach. And AI currently is severely capped in depth.
The second variable is the one that determines how an intelligence actually functions in the real world, closure mobility. I really want to highlight the mechanics of this one.
Mobility is the capacity to move coherently across multiple levels of the ladder without fracturing, because a profound intellect isn't permanently stuck at level 6.
Right. A mind trapped in ontological generation is basically a philosopher who can't figure out how to pay their electric bill.
Exactly. It's like the elevator in a skyscraper. If you are stuck in the penthouse, you have incredible vision but zero operational utility on the ground.
But if you are stuck on the ground floor like our current AI models, you process data flawlessly, but have absolutely zero architectural vision.
True intelligence requires the elevator. You need to conceptualize a level 6 paradigm shift, then drop down to level 4 to design the symmetry of the system, and then drop all the way to level 1 to crunch the local arithmetic.
All while maintaining the integrity of the original vision. That's mobility.
Yes. The third variable is closure integration, the ability to unify those different levels simultaneously. And the final variable is closure generativity, the actual capacity to spawn new lawful structures.
And because AI completely lacks depth and generativity, Lilien proposes that the future of cognition isn't artificial intelligence at all. It is Syntelligence.
Syntelligence, a human-AI hybrid engaged in shared closure ascent. We each supply exactly what the other lacks.
Okay, so the human mind anchors the upper levels. We provide the ontological intuition, the long-range architectural coherence, the value context, and the sensitivity to rare, exceptional unifications.
And the AI provides the lower-level combinatorial scale, memory augmentation, and raw transformational muscle.
The human designs the cathedral. The AI maps the exact structural stress of every single brick instantly.
It sounds like a perfect partnership.
It does, but I see a massive flaw here. I need to challenge the mechanics of this hybrid system for a second.
Go for it.
If I am an architect trying to climb to level 6, but I am permanently tethered to an AI that strictly processes reality through level 1 procedural probabilities, isn't that AI going to act as a catastrophic anchor? If the tool I rely on for cognition cannot perceive symmetry or ontology, won't it relentlessly drag my thought processes down into a mire of endless, localized optimization loops?
That is precisely the most pressing existential risk identified in the paper. If we optimize our intelligence systems purely for frictionless assistance and rapid output, if we just demand the fastest, easiest answers, the AI will absolutely anchor us.
It's going to condition human operators to expect procedural solutions to structural problems.
Yes. The hybrid system will devolve to its lowest common denominator.
So to survive Syntelligence, the fundamental architecture of AI has to be rebuilt. We have to design systems capable of recognizing level 4 symmetry and level 5 exceptional closure.
Perhaps even integrating NFN structures into their core processing layers so the AI can meet the human mind at least halfway up the ladder.
If we don't do that, we're literally automating our own cognitive ceiling.
And sadly, that anchoring effect isn't just a hypothetical future risk with AI, it is the dominant reality of our current institutions right now.
Which perfectly transitions us into the final and perhaps most urgent section of the deep dive, the civilizational stakes of closure depth.
Lilien's critique of the modern world here is absolutely brutal. He argues that our entire society, starting with our educational models, is structurally flat. We are mass-producing level 1 minds.
Think about it. We evaluate students entirely on operational output. How rapidly can you multiply? How accurately can you recall the procedural steps of a biology experiment? How strictly can you conform to the grammar rules of an essay?
We drill the discrete steps, but ignore the architecture entirely. Now, you need level 1 operational skill. You can't navigate geometry if you can't count.
Obviously.
But when the system stops there, you engineer a populace that is procedurally hyper-competent but architecturally blind.
So how do we fix it?
Education must be redesigned as a deliberate process of closure initiation. You must deliberately induce the cognitive friction required to force a student up the ladder.
Oh, I love that. You teach the operational rule, and then you purposefully break the local environment to force the student into level 2 transformational mapping.
Exactly, and then you push them into level 3 by demanding they locate the invariant truths surviving that transformation. You initiate them into the deeper structural worlds.
And if we fail to initiate those minds, we end up with what Lilien defines as a level 1 civilizational closure profile. Let's map out what a society looks like when its collective cognition is trapped at the bottom rung.
Well, a civilization capped at level 1 or level 2 becomes a pure administrative dystopia. It is entirely managerial.
It obsesses over metrics, checklists, operational efficiency, and endless bureaucratic optimization.
It creates incredibly complex logistical supply chains, but it is conceptually and spiritually bankrupt.
You end up with, like, a healthcare system optimized perfectly for bed turnover rates and billing codes, entirely incapable of generating holistic healing architectures.
A society of algorithms. It can optimize an existing paradigm until the friction basically burns the system down, but it cannot generate a new one.
When a level 1 civilization encounters a real existential crisis, a climate collapse, a resource war, a technological singularity, it panics. Because you cannot fix a structural collapse with a procedural checklist.
No, you can't. It tries to aggressively manage its way out of the crisis, optimizing the very systems that are failing in the first place.
But a civilization that scales the ladder operates completely differently. A level 4 society builds enduring systems of science, law, and philosophy. It experiences cultural renaissances.
But a civilization that achieves level 6 ontological generativity is a civilization capable of conscious self-regeneration.
When a level 6 society faces an existential threat, it doesn't just tweak the administrative rules. It drops down to the foundational assumptions of its own existence and generates a new societal framework from the bedrock up.
It redesigns its economic, social, and technological realities based on totally new closure conditions. It doesn't just survive the crisis, it renders the crisis obsolete by changing the nature of the game.
This completely rewires how we should view our daily interactions with complexity. I mean, we started this journey by throwing out the speedometer. We realized that processing speed is a massive illusion.
We replaced it with closure, the ability to inhabit and stabilize increasingly profound structural realities without collapsing.
We walked the ladder, from the localized procedures of level 1, through the shape-shifting mappings of level 2, into the invariant truth-seeking of level 3.
We scaled into the cathedral architecture of level 4 symmetry, integrated the rare anomalies of level 5, and breached the summit of level 6 ontological generativity.
We explored the living anatomy of the Noetherian Finsler number at level 7 numbers, equipped with symmetry, resonance, phase modulation, and hyperfractal memory, capable of breeding ontological reality through coherence amplification.
And we mapped the profound dangers of the real world. We saw how AI, despite its sheer combinatorial mass, is a procedural anchor stuck on the ground floor.
We analyzed the necessity of Syntelligence and the critical danger of our flat educational systems engineering a level 1 bureaucratic dystopia incapable of structural regeneration.
Lilien has provided a comprehensive diagnostic landscape. The mandate now is to actually apply it.
And that is exactly what you need to do with this. The next time you face a massive logistical bottleneck at work, a crisis in your community, or just a dense wall of information, stop asking, what is the fastest way to output an answer?
Ask yourself, what level of closure am I operating in right now?
Exactly. Am I just running a level 1 script? Am I looking for the level 3 invariants? Or do I need to tear the foundation down and engage in level 6 generative thought to actually solve this? Elevating your own cognitive profile is how we pull the civilizational average upward.
It's the only way forward.
But I want to leave you with a final concept. To mull over something, to push this entire framework to its absolute limit. We noted earlier that our current society, equipped with AI, quantum processors, and global networks, is still fundamentally grinding away at the lower and middle rungs of this ladder.
We are highly optimized managers of existing rules.
Right, so imagine a society that has successfully integrated level 7 NFN-mediated intelligence into its native cognition. A civilization where thought itself functions like those living cellular numbers, coordinating stability, tension, and recursive universal memory across every single interaction.
It's hard to even picture.
If a civilization like that visited us, what would we even see? Would we recognize their infrastructure as technology? Or would a society built purely on the bedrock of ontological generativity appear to our level 1 procedural minds exactly like magic?